And when we go live, am I looking at you or am I looking?
Thanks so much for being with us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Lim Nakrin, joined today by attorney Walter Gabriel. Thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be here.
We're really happy to have you here because one of the things we've been following very closely today, let me just bring up some video from earlier today. Former President Trump had another big day inside a Fulton County courtroom today, although he did not personally appear. His attorneys appeared on his behalf today. And again, they tried to get the charges against him thrown out. Apart from Mr. Trump, we saw former Georgia Republican Party Chair David Schaefer's legal team. They're trying again to get the charges dismissed. This time it's on the basis of First Amendment. They're saying that the comments they made about the 2020 election didn't amount to election interference, but basically are political speech protected by the First Amendment. Walter, what do you think of that line of reasoning? Do you think it has any legal weight, and do you think it'll be successful?
Well, from a practice standpoint, if you happen to represent the former president of the United States and he's being charged with allegations that tie to his speech, you're going to try to lump everything he's doing into political speech. The First Amendment has been cut up by the courts into different categories of speech. Political speech is recognized as the highest form of speech that deserves the most protection. On the other end, there's speech encouraging criminal activity, which is entitled to the lowest amount of protection, which means it's entitled to be, if you are accused of that speech leading to criminal activity, you can be indicted and prosecuted for it. So from a practice standpoint, it's a wise move to throw it up there and couch everything President Trump said under protected political speech. Now, is this likely to win? No. There may be some nominal form of relief as they've gotten from other motion hearings, but ultimately this indictment is very unlikely to be thrown out under First Amendment grounds.
That said, we've seen a tremendous amount of legal resources go towards, trying to throw out these charges. Obviously, in the last few weeks, what we've been talking about is the attempt to have the charges thrown out related to the relationship that Fulton County DA Miss Willis admitted that she had with former Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade, who's now off of the case. That's something that's now going on to the Georgia Court of Appeals. Is it just basically trial practice to try everything you can to get charges thrown out? Or, is there more to it than that?
Practically speaking, if your client has the funds to support you to pursue every motion that there is, well, you throw it up there because there's no harm to your client if you file a motion in criminal court, as long as it's not frivolous and the motion ultimately doesn't prevail. And so what this does ultimately have the effect of is motion after motion after motion. We're getting closer and closer to the presidential election this fall. And if this team is somehow able to stall this trial until the election and former President Trump gets reelected, well, then he's able to then, claim presidential immunity once again. And so, these motions, I'm not surprised that they're coming at this level because if the client has the funds to support it, the legal team is wise to pursue every angle they have.
That said, if the goal is really to pursue every angle they have, and remember that DA Willis had set a proposed trial date of August, which doesn't look realistic. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that doesn't seem realistic at this point. What do we expect next? Is there something else they might have up their sleeve in terms of trying to get the charges dismissed?
Well, if this is not successful, which I don't imagine it to be, I would expect the legal team that's representing Trump to request a stay so they could appeal the court's decision, so they could pursue the First Amendment argument up until the appellate court and maybe even the Supreme Court of Georgia and then the United States. Again, it's a very interesting argument because what Donald Trump is charged with is speech that encouraged criminal activity. Well, obviously, because a president of the United States has never been indicted before, we don't have any case law dealing with a former president speaking in a manner that's accused to be illegal. And so they really have, something to argue. Ultimately, I don't think it's going to be successful to the point where the entire case gets thrown out. But this will take significant time for this to ultimately be flushed out.
Okay, so when you're saying it's going to take significant time, we understand that the judge, they're not meeting again today. The judge did call for a recess a little bit before noon today, but we'll keep track of when the judge issues a ruling. But what happens after that? Once a ruling is issued, say that it's the motion is denied. The motion to have these charges thrown out is denied. It sounds like you think that's what's going to happen. Are the Trump attorneys and Mr. Schaefer's attorneys then going to, file another motion, or can they appeal the ruling on that motion?
Oh, they certainly do have the right to an appeal, and I expect them to do that. I expect them to appeal this issue until it's exhausted, and it's exhausted by the Supreme Court either refusing to hear it or hearing it and siding with the lower courts. And after this, I wouldn't be surprised if the legal team had another ground for dismissal under a different legal theory.
Yeah, very interesting. And so it sounds like you believe that the goal is to delay past the presidential election, hope to get presidential immunity and so forth. What does that look like? What are we going to see coming into this newsroom? Are we going to see more motions? Are we going to see more appeals? Are we, maybe, going to see some civil lawsuits? Is it possible that, there could be civil litigation coming out of this aimed at maybe the government?
Well, I'm not sure if any sort of civil action would have the effect of slowing down the criminal trial from happening. I would expect another motion or two from the legal team under different grounds to strike different, counts under the indictment or strike different indictments. There were different motion hearings where the court did strike some counts, and the prosecution does have the ability to reallege new counts after that decision was made. And so I imagine if the prosecution would amend to add those additional counts, perhaps we'd see a challenge to that. But really, the delay effect that they've had on this has been, it's been pretty successful so far. And generally speaking, when you represent a client on the defense side, it does favor you to stall a trial out as long as you can, because witness memories can fade, evidence can be, deemed less effective, and, it's on the state to prove everything, and you just never know what'll happen as a case drags on and on with different forms of evidence. So not a bad day for the defense, even if they don't ultimately get what they're looking for.
Interesting. Also just kind of for a little bit of context, let's not forget that there is a federal case that pretty much just mirrors this, an election interference case against the former president. And there's another federal case concerning, alleged mishandling classified documents. And then there were several civil cases that we've been following as well. One from, Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman that they won. Yet to be seen if they'll actually get the money, but they were the election workers who were accused of, election fraud, and then another involving E. Jean Carroll. So, there's a lot going on here. But I guess one question I have is how do these things impact each other, if at all? Do they impact each other? Does it make scheduling a nightmare? Does it just, exhaust the resources of the Trump team? I mean, how does it impact?
You got to think at some point it would have that effect of exhaustion in terms of efforts, time, and money. Now, as far as scheduling and coordination is concerned, generally speaking, when there's a conflict, criminal cases take priority over civil cases, federal cases take priority over state cases. And I imagine there's a lot of coordination between the courts involving former President Trump. But they do, because you do have all these simultaneous actions going on, they can't go forward as they otherwise would, because you have one defendant who has the right to be present for these actions. And he being involved in these different courts in different parts of the country, it does have the effect of them all being delayed by one another.
Gotcha. Any final thoughts on this election interference case before we moved on? Before we move on?
Well, final thought. The First Amendment is something that is really more complicated. People think it's an absolute, but it's really not. And while this is an interesting argument being brought by the defense, it's ultimately very unlikely to work. But this is not. I don't imagine this is the last that we're going to see from the defense in the way of pretrial motions.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that, that's something most people would agree with. I do want to ask you now about some of the bills. Let's kind of switch topics here and talk about what is known as sine die, which I guess in Latin means indefinitely, and we've interpreted it to mean sign or die. Essentially, it's the last day of Georgia's General Assembly, the 40-day legislative session, and essentially this is the time when bills are signed or they die. It's exactly, that's pretty much the simple way to put it. So I want to ask you, because so many of these bills do have a legal element to them, and you're a parent as well. So the first thing I want to ask you about is the social media Senate bill that is up for consideration. It's Senate Bill 351, and it actually the goal of it is to require social media companies to get parental permission before letting kids younger than 16 create accounts. Would also ban the use of social media using school computers and internet, and it also would create some new anti-bullying rules. Are there some First Amendment concerns with that bill? What do you think of it?
Well, I'll say, Joy, I don't see a real downside to this proposed legislation. More and more studies are showing that social media is having harmful impacts on children. And as social media is relatively new, we don't know the full effects yet. And so, and as the First Amendment angle is concerned, the First Amendment, courts have held that children don't have full First Amendment rights, especially in a school setting. So I don't see a real constitutional challenge to this legislation, and I don't see a real downside to it either.
You don't see any constitution. Okay, that's interesting. Well, do you think that the social media companies might take issue with this legislation if kids are required to get parental permission before creating accounts? Wouldn't that limit, maybe children signing up?
I think it's a hard position for them to publicly take.
Okay.
That they have a problem with children being restricted on how they have access to social media. I don't think it's a real shock that they target or they desire children to be, hooked, for lack of a better phrase, on social media.
Yeah.
But it's probably going to be an interesting thing for them to object to, given what we are starting to learn about the impacts that social media can have on children.
Yeah. Oh, that's a fair point. It makes a lot of sense. We'll have to see what happens with that. I do want to ask you about this bill for judges' pay. It's Senate Bill 479. It would create guidelines to raise and standardize pay for judges. Might be accompanied by a constitutional amendment, a House Resolution 1042. But this idea of just kind of standardizing pay for judges, raising pay for judges, is that a good thing? Do you think that maybe it's a burden on taxpayers? What's your thought?
Well, I think it's a popular thought that lawyers are just overpaid anyway, but we want our judges to be the best and the brightest. We want the best selection of people to choose from to be our judges. And to do that, we have to raise the pay to keep up with the cost of living that even us attorneys face every day. And so, as you know from live streaming this case with this Trump trial, the judge here is bombarded with all these complicated issues, and I think the judge is doing a great job questioning both sides and making sure all these issues are flushed out. And so I think having the best potential judges to choose from is important, and I think raising the pay to especially keep up with rising inflation and cost of living it's important.
Okay, that's a good point. Can you see people being opposed to it? Can you see any opposition to this bill?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
There are folks who think judges are already paid enough and that kind of stuff. But I just think you need to do these kind of things to keep up to make people want to continue to be in the public spotlight, which more and more judges are now in, with more of these cases being public.
That's a fair argument. I want to ask you about a couple of bills. These are two different bills But essentially, both of them do touch on LGBTQ plus rights. So the first bill I want to ask you about is this School Policies House Bill 1104. And essentially, this would ban transgender girls from being on sports teams with cisgender girls, girls who were born girls, did not, transition essentially. So this would ban the mixing of transgender girls with other girls, playing high school sports. It would also ban sex education in 5th grade and below, and it would require a system for notifying parents of every item a child obtained in a school library. So obviously this is, there's a lot of debate on both sides. What's your take?
It's one bill with three different topics. The books part, I don't think it's all that controversial. But the sex ed, that's fine. I mean, you have to pick some age where it starts and stops. But when it comes to transgender legislation, there's little compromise when it comes to how we regulate, how we treat children. Instead of an outright ban on competing, maybe there's some other less restrictive thing we can do to balance the thought of, that transgender child having an unfair advantage genetically, but also against the thought of isolating that child from not being able to just compete in any sport. Maybe there are just other things we can do to keep those children involved with their classmates, but this has the effect of isolating them if they would want to participate in sports.
Well, so I have, I just had a thought, but I wondered about, having sports teams based on even size or weight, because ultimately when we hear arguments about banning transgender girls from participating in sports with other girls, part of it has to do with some sensitivities in the locker room, some perceived issues, and part of it has to do with this perception of an unfair advantage, that if someone is born a man and transitions to, a girl, if they're born male and transitions to female, some people perceive that they may be, taller or more muscular. So I wondered about sort of guidelines for, essentially weight classes.
And things like that, Joy, there's just not enough thought into how we can help this transgender child integrate in with their classmates. It's just, we let them compete fully or we ban them entirely. And there's got to be some sort of way to where they can be involved, but maybe not, just be thrown in with everyone in a way that rises, that brings the concerns that people have.
Yeah, and sometimes one has to wonder about just the general practices in locker rooms anyway, even if there were no issues surrounding what we're talking about, integrating transgender youth. Maybe it doesn't need to be that everyone's changing in the same open room in any case, and maybe that's not really a great idea. Just a thought. But another question I have for you about another bill, Senate Bill 180, has to do with religious liberty. In some ways, it does cover similar ground because it is talking about LGBTQ rights, many people would argue. So proponents of this bill say it's really aimed to protect religious liberty. Other people say it's really a license to discriminate about, against members of the LGBTQ plus community in the name of religion. We've seen a lot of litigation and court challenges surrounding this issue, particularly when it comes to businesses, who, have business owners who have a religious bend and have denied services to members of the LGBTQ plus community. What do you think of this particular bill?
It's going to give rise to a lot of litigation because it does arguably give religious organizations a license to discriminate. But the religious beliefs of the organizations are what is, driving their decisions to do what some say is discriminatory. And so this is it's another one of those balancing tests between providing public accommodations to everyone and allowing private organizations to act within their religious beliefs. And so I don't think this legislation is something that's it's hard to ignore the political, fallout from this. It's pretty politically motivated, and it's going to lead to a lot of litigation, and I think that's pretty likely in the near future.
I want to ask you also about another bill which has to do with wrongful convictions. This is Senate Bill 429. It would create a commission that could recommend that people who are in prison and then later cleared of wrongdoing and wrongfully convicted, deemed to have been wrongfully convicted, that they would be paid at least $60,000 for each year that they were in prison. Because right now, it doesn't seem that there's a very clear path for compensation for that. Just imagine it. If you were wrongfully convicted of a crime, spent years of your life in prison, lost years of your life, and then were later cleared, you got to be compensated for that. What do you think of this?
It's a starting point. But to your point, Joy, and to anyone listening, if there was an ad on Indeed and it was a job posting and it's to be wrongfully convicted for 5 years, what would you accept to be wrongfully convicted in prison for years and years? 60,000 is a good starting point. Because there are people who've been wrongfully convicted in different states in America and who've had no monetary relief for their wrongful conviction. It's terribly sad. And these are people who have been exonerated and they've been given nothing more than a bus pass to get home. And it's a terribly sad situation. And 60,000 in this legislation, it's a good starting point for sure.
Yeah, well, it's a starting point. But yeah, I mean, would I want to go to prison for a year if you paid me $60,000? No, I would not.
Absolutely not for me either.
So you're right. There's maybe some more work to be done there. I want to ask you about another bill, which I think you know more than most other attorneys, not just more than most people, but most other attorneys, because you can't handle a lot of cases like this. But I want to talk about this bill concerning lawsuit limits, Senate Bill 426, which actually limits the ability to sue an insurance company directly after a truck wreck. You do a lot of personal injury law. You help people who have suffered injuries because of accidents and so forth. What do you think of this bill?
So Georgia, for starters, is not a direct action state. Direct action meaning you get to sue the insurance company. So in most trials in Georgia, you cannot mention the word insurance, or it's a mistrial and the whole case has to have a do-over. That has the effect of making jurors unsure as to who is paying the judgment that they ultimately award. And sympathy undoubtedly plays in a role in reducing the amount that the plaintiff would otherwise recover because they feel sorry for the defendant, think the defendant's a nice person, and that has an effect on reducing the amount of money that an injured person would recover. Trucking cases in Georgia are it's the one category of case where you get to name the insurance company, and it's not a mystery that insurance will pay the judgment. This bill has the effect of limiting the number of instances where you get to name an insurance company, and we only have so many here in Georgia to begin with, and it has the effect of limiting what an injured person could recover.
So I want to ask you, because you have so much experience in this area of law, what do you typically see when insurance companies are involved or not involved? What's the typical in terms of how it applies to the cases that you handle? What would be the impact?
Well, Joy, the truth is most personal injury cases settle before they even reach a courtroom. But the fact that the insurance company is named on the pleadings or the company knows that they can be added as a party has the effect of allowing us to negotiate more for people who are injured. And that's very real when we're talking, about people who've been really hurt and need to be compensated for time where they haven't been able to go to work and provide for their families. And so this really has an impact on limiting what people can recover from these wrecks where we can no longer name insurance companies.
I do want to take a moment, Walter, and veer off course before I ask you about another bill, because you do a lot of personal injury law. If people do want to reach you, and how can they do that? What kinds of cases are you interested in taking?
My firm handles car accidents, trucking accidents, slip and falls, dog bites. If there's a situation where someone is injured by the negligence of another person or company, we help people all across Georgia and Louisiana in those instances. And so you can find us at callwalt.com. We're also on Instagram, Facebook. We're pretty easy to find online.
And any final thoughts on this bill and really just kind of if people are looking for general free legal advice and they're in a situation like this?
Well, it's always free to call my firm, and and really most injury firms for that matter, for just to chat with us to just see, what kind of case you believe you have. And as far as this tort reform bill goes, there are a lot of people who believe, that injury cases have the effect of raising our car insurance premiums.
Okay.
And this would limit, or help us lower what our car insurance costs are. And I haven't seen hardly any studies that show when a state passes a reform that limits what people can recover, that the year or subsequent years later that our car insurance premiums actually go down.
Okay.
And so I think that's a big myth that insurance companies have passed on, successfully to us to
Wow.
make us vote against our own interests in this manner.
Very interesting. Okay, so essentially you think the goal is essentially to limit what people can recover from insurance companies because of fear of raising premiums, but you think it has a boomerang effect in some ways. Or a
Definitely.
negative effect.
It just, insurance companies promise everywhere that our rates will go down, but it never happens.
Okay. Before we let you go, I want to take a moment to ask you about Senate Bill 332, which is very controversial, and it has to do with disciplining prosecutors. So it basically revived a commission with the power to discipline and remove prosecutors. Now, Democrats say it essentially is aimed at the Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. Some people have called it essentially a part of a witch hunt against her. Others, obviously proponents of the bill, say it's necessary to hold prosecutors accountable. You've had a chance to look at the contents of the bill. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's fair?
Well, in a vacuum, it's fair, but you can't ignore the timing and the political climate of what's going on right here in Atlanta with this trial involving former President Trump and prosecutor Fani Willis. If this bill were enforced to potentially remove Fani Willis from this trial, it would have in my assumption, it would have a devastating impact on the ability to prosecute former President Trump in time. And so this is definitely one bill to watch.
All right, and something that we absolutely are going to be watching very closely. Thank you so much, Attorney Walter Gabriel, joining us live here with your insight and analysis. I do want to let our viewers now know that we're going to continue our coverage of Sine Die after just a quick intermission, but you're going to next hear from political expert Tim Darnell, who is on our digital team. He's laughing that I call him that, but he is absolutely a political expert. But you're going to hear from him. He's going to break down what's happening with Sine Die today. So keep it right here on Atlanta News First Plus.
Severe weather. Atlanta's no stranger to it. Power outages, flooded streets, hail damage. We've seen it all.
That's why Atlanta News First has the largest team of meteorologists in the entire Southeast to keep watch over your street so no neighborhood is left in the dark.
7 meteorologists giving you first alerts no matter where you are.
Days before a drop hits the ground, hours before the first rumble of thunder.
To keep you ready for anything, this is why we first alert.
This is your home for Atlanta TV.
Do not overtop.
What we toasted to?
Life.
That is glistening, by the way.
Beautiful?
Wow.
He put my whole hand in his mouth.
If I was a cougar, trust me, tall glass of water would have been going home with me.
So you a man with 2 chicks and you ain't having fun?
At all.
Yes.
Oh my.
This is my diva dish.
God.
You can't sing anymore, Anthony. What would you do? This.
It's all local and it's all Atlanta. Only on Atlanta's own Peachtree TV.
It's a problem every night on Atlanta roads. Drivers without lights. Now you see me, now you don't. So why does it keep happening? Atlanta News First investigates, exposing a fault in many cars that's leaving drivers in the dark. It's not careless, they have no idea. Scan this code to go directly to the story and learn why every night drivers are risking it all with lights out.
This is it. Any bills that don't pass by the end of the day today are dead. Sponsors will have to start all over next year. Among the bills we're watching today, one that would legalize sports betting in Georgia, an immigration bill that would require local governments to coordinate with federal immigration enforcement agencies, some elections bills, including one that would allow local election officials to adjust the number of election day voting booths based on turnout during early voting, and another that would make available online high-resolution scans of every ballot cast. We're also watching to see what happens to a bill that would prohibit puberty blockers for minors experiencing gender dysphoria. Most importantly, lawmakers still haven't approved a final budget for next year. Republican leaders in the House and Senate still need to resolve some conflicts. We're learning that so far funding for health care and mental health is the highest it's ever been.
Mental health has been a priority championed by the House for years. The Senate has been right there beside them in this process, and we're going to continue to invest in mental health because we've realized what used to be a problem at our jails and in our prisons is now a problem also in our hospitals.
We expect lawmakers will work well into the evening. They have been known to go past midnight. We'll be watching, and we'll let you know how it all shakes out. At the state capitol, Rebecca Schramm, Atlanta News First.
And Rebecca Schramm, just one of our many reporters out at the Capitol, bringing you team coverage on everything that we can expect as Georgia enters its final day for many of the bills we've been following throughout this legislative session to, as they say, sign or die. I want to start by introducing myself. I'm Maria Moreau here on Atlanta News First Plus, bringing you coverage of Sine Die, the final day that everyone tunes in for to see what will be the end-all for the legislative session. We have a lot of team coverage for you up ahead, starting with our in-house political expert, investigative digital producer Tim Darnell, and our political reporter Doug Reardon out at the Capitol will be joining us here momentarily. Let's talk about these bills. The ones that we are watching the closest right here is immigration, sports betting and school policies, social media, property taxes and film credit, judge pay, and wrongful convictions. That is all up in the air and pending passage at this point in the day. Now, for the bills that have already passed, income taxes, cash bail, healthcare permitting, union organizing, and lawsuit limits, as well as foreign-owned farmland and water rights, all of these are laid out for you on our website, atlantanewsfirst.com. You can check out that website as well as in the Atlanta News First app. It's free. If you are trying to learn more about these bills and what we are looking for ahead tonight, you can tune in right here and, of course, check out our digital platforms for more information. But right now, I want to bring in our political expert, Tim Darnell. Tim, you have been following this throughout the entire legislative session. Some of the bills that we are watching for especially include immigration, the 2025 budget, as I understand it, and sports betting. Is that correct?
That's correct. And Maria, really the only thing that lawmakers in Georgia are required to do every year is pass a budget. And we're going right up against the midnight tonight deadline as the House and Senate attempt to reconcile two differing budgetary proposals that include a lot of goodies for Georgia's public school employees, pay raises, university employee pay raises, as well as pay raises for law enforcement. But some of the other bills that you were talking about, obviously, one of the top of the list issues, one of the most emotionally controversial and really retching bills has to do with immigration in the state of Georgia. We all know about the tragedy earlier this year where a former University of Georgia nursing student, Laken Riley, was found dead on the campus of UGA in Athens, and Jose Ibarra, who is in the country undocumented, a Venezuelan national, has been charged with the crime. This has propelled the issue of immigration and legal migration status to the forefront in what is already a politically charged 2024 election year. Now we have two bills in the House of Representatives, the one of which would force local governments to help federal immigration authorities enforce immigration laws here in the state, and the other would punish and discipline and possibly remove government officials who are in a city or a jurisdiction or a community in Georgia who harbor individuals who are undocumented and who have entered the country illegally. All of this was spurred by the University of Georgia slaying earlier this year, as I mentioned, of Lake and Riley, and it's going to be a forefront as we move further and further and closer to November 2024 with this presidential election.
And this bill can be highly consequential across the state. Our Chelsea Binefor actually went down to the Capitol to talk closer with legislators about this issue. But as you can imagine, and as you said, Tim, a very emotional outcome for this bill that we will learn later today.
With just 2 days till the end of the legislative session, lawmakers are scrambling to pass as many bills as possible, including one that targets illegal immigrants in Georgia.
Everyone in Georgia should be concerned about criminals who are committing crimes in our country illegally.
As the end of the legislative session draws near, two Republican-backed immigration bills are still on the table. The push for stricter policies comes after Athens-Clarke County police say an undocumented man from Venezuela killed 22-year-old nursing student Laken Riley on UGA's campus last month.
A man with an evil heart stole her life. He was in this country and in this state illegally. My vision for every senator in this chamber is that you protect citizens from this illegal invasion.
Riley's father and many lawmakers are pushing to pass House Bills 301 and 1105. Both would essentially strip funding from cities who are harboring illegal immigrants and law enforcement agencies who don't check an inmate's immigration status.
And it makes sure that our locals in our jails, as well as our state correction officials, are cooperating with ICE to make sure that these folks are properly deported after their crimes.
But opponents of the bill, like Senator Nabila Islam Parks from Gwinnett County, say the pair of bills is discriminatory and says it could rip migrant children away from their parents.
It would lead to mass racial profiling of our immigrant communities.
Islam Parks says the legislation would also penalize local governments who are often already strapped for cash.
I don't think that this is a bill that was thought through all the way.
The bills have already passed through both chambers and now head back to the House for a final vote. It is likely that they'll pass, but again, these will have to be pushed through by Thursday. Reporting from the state capitol, Chelsea Binefor, Atlanta News First.
Yeah, so immigration, top of mind, especially with the recent events that we've brought to you and the tragedy that unfolded on University of Georgia's campus. Another bill, and this one I remember talking with you about right here on Atlanta News First Plus. Sports betting continues to be the subject every single Sine Die that we've had in recent years.
It has, and Maria, there are more than 30 states in the United States that have already legalized online sports betting, and they're generating literally billions of dollars in income. You see all of the major professional sports leagues really partnering with DraftKings and FanDuel and some of these other sports betting applications, and it's not legal here in Georgia. We do have the Georgia Lottery. Now, by constitutional law here in Georgia, any gaming applications or endeavors or activities have to be governed by the Georgia Lottery. Also, state law requires that all gaming revenues from the Georgia Lottery, or say we have pari-mutuel betting in the future or sports betting this year, have to be dedicated toward public education and the Hope Scholarship. Last year, when you and I were talking about this, Democrats were really wanting the Hope Scholarship to be awarded on a needs basis, whereas Republicans want to keep it on a merit basis, as it is right now. So you had two political parties who could not figure out if they were to actually approve this, how they were going to divvy up the billions of dollars that's going to result from any kind of legalized online sports betting. Now we have two bills in the Senate currently being debated, both of which would legalize sports betting here in Georgia through an online format, but only if voters approve of the measure in a constitutional amendment. Now, one organization I spoke with earlier this year would really like to see any kind of sports betting legislation include several $million in funds to help individuals who are suffering from a gambling addiction to actually seek help for treatment. And I believe we had that interview.
And before we take you to it, I do just want to let the viewers know this is part of a weekly series that you produce and host called Political Update, where we go through all of the political headlines that Georgia is immersed in. It is a fantastic segment to watch if you are trying to keep up with Georgia politics, and you have a very interesting and captivating way of breaking it down in a way that is quick and digestible. So fantastic resource to add to your news consumption if you are trying to stay up to date on those particular headlines. Let's take you to that interview now.
Strives to raise awareness around what this type of product looks like and ensuring that the consumer's best interests are really at the heart of this. We also aim to drive awareness around the social harms that can result for some individuals and ensuring all those that profit, the state included, from legalized gambling are doing something to minimize and reduce and take care of those that are harmed from it. I'm really hoping to take meetings and raise awareness that this current bill that's being driven by the industry and leaders within the Senate would be a bad deal for the people of Georgia. Right now, the bill, as it's currently being presented, attributes $0 to problem gambling for the people in Georgia. Basically, if you were to develop a problem from the products that are now going to be in every home, on every phone, any time of day, you'd have no guarantee for help or hope from someone to help you overcome this. Yeah, so gambling is just as addictive as, say, tobacco, alcohol, substance misuse. It can become a full-blown addiction the way we talk about others. Now, let's put it into finer context, all gambling in general. Right now, Georgia has the 5th most profitable lottery in the United States, bringing in about $5.9 billion per year. You have an estimated 115,000 individuals who are struggling with a gambling disorder right now. And you're only contributing about $400,000 to understanding, preventing, and treating that. That ranks some of the worst in the nation. You rank 35th. The average per capita contribution for states is 40 cents, and you're at an abysmal 4. Now, that is just in a market that has simply lottery. We don't have casinos. We don't have online. Anytime you introduce a new product, you're going to increase the number of problems. However, according to a National Council on Problem Gambling survey, the problematic rates of play within the sports betting vertical is 2 to 3 times greater than other forms of gambling. We are talking about offering a highly addictive product into a market without any considerations or guaranteed funding to combat it. And that is a dangerous concoction. We're not saying don't do it, but you have to do it right. And this bill does not account for that. So that's a great question, and one that actually we're starting to learn a lot more about as states and entities contribute dollars to research this addiction and problem. In fact, actually, abstinence only, similar to that of, say, alcohol or substance misuse, for a very long time has been thought this is the only way to cure or help an addiction. But actually, that may not be the case. And with technological advances to understand player behaviors and early warning signs, there could be ways to curb a player's problematic playing tendency before it even becomes a full-blown addiction. Also not required within the legislation as proposed. Senator Cowsert offered up a bill that was not only a constitutional amendment, so it would be turned over to the voters, but had dedicated sufficient funding to researching, treating, preventing gambling addiction. That is the only way for the people of Georgia to be guaranteed that this product is going to be the safest possible scenario when coming into the state.
So a little perspective on sports betting. This is a favorite bill to follow, certainly for us here at Atlanta News First Plus. I asked you this last year, and I'm going to ask you this again. What do you predict the outcome is for this bill?
Maria, I can't see right now a way forward for the House and the Senate to actually agree on a bill that would legalize sports betting. Now, interestingly enough, at this time last year, we were doing a story on how DraftKings had opened up a several 100,000 square foot technology facility in Ponce Square, or in Ponce Midtown. Yeah, we were discussing, okay, does DraftKings and FanDuel know something that we don't? But it's an issue that's going to come to fruition within the next 5 years, I would say, definitely before the end of this decade. I still think that there are enough moralistic issues and also funding issues in terms of how to distribute the billions of dollars that will be generated from legalized online sports betting for educational purposes here in Georgia. I don't see it actually passing this year, but that being before midnight tonight. But if it does, I can see kind of an uphill battle for proponents who would like to see Georgia voters pass a constitutional amendment, possibly even as soon as this November.
Yeah, certainly a lot of bills on the table today. We will know by the end of today, maybe a little after midnight, the outcome for most of them. Sign or die, as they say. Well, not only do Georgia lawmakers have all of these bills that they need and hope to get through, they also have to come to an agreement on the 2025 budget, and that is something that is going to affect nearly everyone in the state. Let's talk about that.
So for the budget that Governor Brian Kemp and his administration is proposing is a record $61 billion, capital with a B, billion-dollar budget that includes a lot of pay raises for public school employees, university system employees. Governor and both parties know how important the public school teacher lobby here is in Georgia, and just how crucial these chronically underpaid. I don't think that we can disagree on the fact that teachers are among the most valuable yet underpaid public workers that we have. So the governor and Republican Party, obviously, we're in an election year, not for the governor, but a very high-stakes presidential election coming up. We have a very school teacher-friendly, university system-friendly budget that lawmakers are considering. They've got to get it done before midnight tonight. Let's say this has happened before, and I have seen it happen on the chamber, when one chamber or another is actually going past midnight. You will see a clerk bring out a very large step ladder, and they will climb to the very top, and they'll turn that clock back just to make sure that they are meeting their legal and obligatory constitutional requirements. I'm seeing a lot of speculation on social media that we could be looking for a very long evening tonight.
Yeah, a very long evening for these lawmakers and a lot of Georgia political heads looking at this very closely, just trying to predict the outcome as we get closer and closer to that final hour, minute, second of Sine Die. Our team coverage starts now with Atlanta News First Plus, but it is going to continue into the evening and the night. Doug Reardon, our political reporter, is at the state capitol now. We also have our statewide reporter, Abby Kasouris, talking to these lawmakers and their hopes. Take a listen on what she learned about the 2025 budget.
We still can't show you the final budget document. It's being changed as we speak. The budget, $36 billion. A small portion of that, $300,000, is being debated.
Is this on? Yeah, it's on.
The Senate and House appropriation chairs head-to-head after the House Chairman Matt Hatchett turned down the document, sending them back to the drawing board. Lawmakers say they're using a lot of red ink, crossing things out.
And there's a lot of people in this state that are affected by this budget. You're probably going to see some of my frustration reflected in the final conference committee report.
The Senate wants more money for literacy awareness, more funding for the Department of Corrections to invest in infrastructure to make sure there is no cell phone signal in jails. The House wants to boost judge pay and fund a controversial measure to pay teachers $10,000 more a year to carry guns in school.
If you want to know somebody's priorities, you can look at their checkbook.
The big things they agree on: a 4% pay increase for state employees, up to $70,000 in salary. The typical state employee makes just over $50,000. $2,500 raises for pre-K and school teachers starting July 1st, boosting average teacher pay to $65,000 annually. More than $200 million for school transportation upgrades. This year, mental health and health care funding is the highest they've ever been.
Mental health's been a priority championed by the House for years. The Senate has been right there beside them in this process, and we're going to continue to invest in mental health because we've realized what used to be a problem at our jails and in our prisons is now a problem also in our hospitals.
Lawmakers and lawyers sitting down making those tweaks. They'll present it before the House and the Senate for a vote on Thursday. In Atlanta, I'm Abby Kasouris.
All right, and as we mentioned, we have team coverage for Sine Die across the board. Our Doug Reardon joins us now from the state capitol. Doug, you have gotten to the capitol a little while ago, starting to pick up with the afternoon, evening that we're headed into, and it is a busy one for these lawmakers.
Yes, always is, guys, and they are going to go right down to the wire here with their bills, trying to get them passed. This is the last chance they will have, so lawmakers right now are on a break. They will be back at 2:45 inside the House and Senate chambers behind us here, talking about a multitude of things that are going to impact people in a number of ways across our state. Just a few that I want to talk about that I know we haven't discussed just quite yet. One big one is immigration. This is all under the context of 22-year-old nursing student Laken Riley, who was found dead on the campus of University of Georgia a few weeks ago. Ever since then, when it was discovered that her alleged killer was an undocumented individual who was here in the country from Venezuela, lawmakers got to work very quickly about halfway through this session on 2 immigration bills. They are both still not passed, and so that is something that we expect to see in the next 10 hours come before these lawmakers on both floors. 1105 would require law enforcement officers to report to the federal government when they have arrested and detained undocumented individuals in their jurisdictions. 301, which again still is not passed, would allow citizens to sue their local municipalities for being sanctuary cities, for not communicating with the federal and state government on undocumented immigrants that they have in their custody, or for failing to communicate with ICE in any capacity. It would allow citizens to sue their local governments. And so that is, of course, one that we have talked about very often throughout this session, and we'll probably talk a good bit about throughout the remainder of the night as it goes through this process.
And Doug, we joined you here last time on Atlanta News First Plus in 2023 for Sine Die. What's the energy like in the room right now? I hear a lot of buzzing behind you.
Yeah, well, and again, like I said, lawmakers right now are currently on a break, so I think this is probably the quietest that we'll see it all night until that gavel bangs at midnight and everybody leaves the building. But there is, I don't want to say chaos, that's a negative connotation to that word, but there's a lot of lively action here at the Capitol. Lobbyists running around trying to get their last-minute efforts and pitches done to lawmakers, and of course, lawmakers are here just trying to make sense of some of these bills. Now, this is a very chaotic day. I will say that. A lot of lawmakers are voting on stacks of bills. Some of them, they haven't had a ton of time to digest or really understand. And so they'll be going off the real crux of these bills, sometimes 1 or 2 sentence summaries of these bills as they come before them on the House and Senate floors. And so for that reason, it's a very rapid fire day. Bills get passed simultaneously in both the House and the Senate. And so we're going to be paying a lot of close attention here to what is being discussed and passed on the House floor and on the Senate floor today. Certainly an exciting day, I will say that, no matter who we are here in this building.
You can tune in starting at 3 o'clock for our coverage. Excuse me, I was muted there. As we continue to take you through some of the bills and the impacts that we will see out of the legislative session and its final day. So Doug Reardon, of course, taking you to the state capitol for Atlanta News First throughout the afternoon and evening. You can tune in with him and keep it right here on Atlanta News First Plus as we continue to bring you Sine Die 2024 edition. Have a great day.